Hi, it's Kristen, and this week on the 10 to 20 Talk Radio podcast, I have Lisa Jander, who is the teen dating mechanic. You would never let your kids get into one of these without having a driver's license, so why in the world do we think that they can go out into the dating world and have successful relationships without some guidance? Lisa's going to kind of give us an overview on giving your teen their dating license. Thanks for being here, and let's get to today's show. Hi, everybody. This is Kristen with 10 to 20 Parenting, and you're listening to the 10 to 20 Talk Radio podcast. Lisa Jander, who is the author of Driver's Ed Model for Dating, again, tongue-tied, it must be me trying to read, I think, is with us this week on the podcast. And Lisa has a really unique take and lessons on teenagers and dating and how we parents can help navigate those waters. Welcome, Lisa.
Hi, Kristen. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for joining me from San Diego.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Why don't you take a couple of seconds and introduce everybody to you and what you do and what you've done.
Thanks. Well, obviously, my name is Lisa Jander, and I wrote a book called Dators Ed, the Instruction Manual for Parents, and I also wrote have an ebook as well. I'm a teen dating mechanic. So I'll explain a little bit more about that.
Okay.
But I'm a certified life coach, an author, a speaker. I write curriculums for schools and churches, and I actually do a lot of work with the youth to help them navigate the teen dating landscape.
The teen dating landscape is something that terrifies so many parents. And, you know, many people know I've got 3 daughters, of which one is definitely of dating age. Another one who's 14 is not really there yet. But, you know, especially with me having 3 daughters, ever since they have become 3 daughters, you know, we always heard that, you know, oh, you better get yourself a shotgun type attitude. And I've never been a big fan of that anyhow, just because I don't think it's very fair to our teens, because it's a natural part of life.
Yes. Yeah. It definitely is. And I think, that's why this whole driving analogy kind of came up 10 years ago, actually. And one of the things that's really critical as we think about the desire to drive a car kind of comes online around the same time that desire to date does. So they're making observations, they're looking, you drive with a 12-year-old and ask them what their favorite car is, they'll tell you. It's the same thing. They're looking around school, they're looking around their neighborhoods, their environments, and they're saying, yeah, that's somebody I might like to date. So, it's kind of a great analogy to really dispel some of the myths, but also bring some realistic logic into it and say, there's a better way than, like you say, a shotgun.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Dating is a lot different today than it was when you and I were in high school and starting to date. Back then, well, even in middle school, we used the term we're going together, right? And where we were going, nobody knew. Nowhere, probably with our parents, but it's really different now because it's, I think, more uncommon, at least in my observation, it's more uncommon for there to be actual couple like one-on-one dates. It tends to be more of a group setting. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, actually what it is, it's a very creative setting because they're going where their parents can't find them, and it's so much easier now. I mean, the big difference is, the desire's still there. It's always been the same. For centuries, the desire's been there. The difference with our generation, the biggest difference is social media.
Yeah.
So I had a 5-mile radius. My phone was attached to my kitchen wall by a cord. And for privacy, I would stretch that cord all the way around into the bathroom, shut the door, and my mother would be on the outside with a cup listening through the door. So now, and if I didn't drive a car, as far as I could go on my bike was as far as I could go, and the whole neighborhood knew me. Whereas now, with a device held in their hand, they can reach all the way to Afghanistan or Bosnia or Italy or wherever they want to go. And that's what's so frightening about it.
And that's true because they can actually get into some form of a relationship without ever having met.
Yes.
And interestingly, that's also for me, it kind of, let's go back to the whole driving thing. There are a lot of kids out there who aren't even interested in getting their driver's license for that exact same reason.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that brings up a really good point, is that every kid is different. So just because we say you can get your driver's license at 16, a parent might say, like for instance, my kids, I mean, my son is a great driver. He's super responsible. He has really good reflexes. He had a knowledge of the road more so than my daughter. So does that mean both should get their driver's license at 16 just because it's allowed? When parents say to me, I say, when are you going to let your kids date? And they say, well, not till they're 16. Well, why? Why is that the magic age? So, the real key in this culture is defining dating. I mean, dating has kind of become an archaic word. It's like courtship. Courtship ended in the 30s with the advent of cars, which is so weird because if you think about it, I mean, the boy walked down the street, he came into the parlor, he sat with the parents, they were in separate chairs, he was kind of interrogated in that environment. And then all of a sudden in the 30s, kids were getting driver's license and having a car, so the boy would pick the girl up and take her to the movies. Well, you put two kids in the back row of a movie theater for an hour and a half and say, okay, your parents aren't going to show up for the next 2 hours. Well, guess what? Trouble started. So, not to say that there wasn't innocent dating, but that's when it went from courtship to dating. Now dating is kind of archaic, and it's like, well, hooking up, friends with benefits. What are we exactly? And so defining dating is really important.
And the group setting, too, I think is a way for teenagers to kind of get around that restriction, I think, for that parents may put on there. Whereas this parent might say, nah, you're too young at 15 to date. They might say, hey, mom, dad, me, and this group of 5 people are going to the movies. Can I go? Well, a parent is 9 times out of 10 going to say yes there.
Yeah.
So now it also comes back to anything that comes with this age group, which is asking questions, talking, having conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? So I ask some tough questions to parents, and I put it in the car analogy, and I say, okay, so your 14-year-old wants to go with 10 other 14-year-olds to the movies on a group date, and you said yes. Let me ask you a question. Would you trust those 14-year-olds, give them your SUV, let them drive into a dark alley for an hour and a half, and sit there and just have fun together by themselves? Would you trust them to make good decisions? Because that's kind of what it comes down to. Yeah. I'm not saying all bad things happen in movie theaters and there aren't good kids that go, but it's just kind of shifting the thinking a little bit and saying, if I wouldn't let them do that, what's my fear around that? Well, it's not that they're driving anywhere. They're sitting in the dark, unattended.
Right.
So is that okay or not?
And is it? And most parents would be like, no, I would never let my 14-year-old go and do that.
Right.
What do you have? And I think it goes back to it's like wash, rinse, repeat maturity. Is there a magic number? What is too young to date?
Well, again, I think it goes back to how you define dating. If you define dating on going to a football game with your friend and you're going to meet your boyfriend under the bleachers, then, that's a different definition than a date, which is a boy that actually comes and sits, goes with the family, let's say, because they can't drive. So they go with the family and they go rock climbing or they go roller skating or they do whatever. And they're kind of off by themselves and they're having their own conversation. So what is dating? I don't think there's a magic age. I think every child, and I think that's the concern, is to assign a magic age and say, well, this is when you can, because that puts a message in the kid's head that they're looking forward to that age. And then now you find out when they turn 16 that they're really not mature enough or responsible enough. Now you have to backtrack off of that. Mm-hmm. So I really discourage, assigning an age for that reason. But the general rule of thumb, I mean, there are kids, I've met kids that haven't dated since they're 22 till they're 22. Is that okay? Well, there's a lot to be learned from dating, from healthy relationships. And that, I call it, the difference is social skill. You learn by being around people, but social virtue is who you are as a person. So social skill is what you do. So it's manners, it's respect, it's opening the car door, it's all those things. Social virtue is, are you humble? Are you generous? Are you considerate? Are you patient? And those things are not necessarily learned by being around people. So those are character development.
This might be too early in this conversation to have this, but one of the few dating situations that we ended up with, one of them kind of turned into a really possessive, obsessive type situation. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
Maybe some warning signs. When should a parent step in? Because, again, like you just said, I mean, part of this is learning how to navigate relationships, right? However, there's a big difference between an amicable, fun, loving kind of relationship. That's easy, right? It's anybody can navigate a boat on flat water, right? But when the storms come, you need to have some skills. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, and let me first say that the 5, and I call them detours, that take these kids off course from the healthy, fun relationships that they should be having. So we have teen sex and pregnancy. That's a constant problem in this culture, always has been. Teen drug and alcohol abuse during relationships, which is, I call, dating under the influence, because you're really not dating under the right mindset. Right. Teen dating violence and abuse, which we'll get into a little bit based on your question. Teen depression, anxiety, stress, huge in dating relationships. And then, of course, the technology piece. So the sexting, the bullying, cyberbullying, that kind of thing. So one of those categories, which you just mentioned, the possessiveness, I think it's really important to help these kids take ownership of their dating future by helping them define and taking ownership by saying out loud the things that are important. So for instance, maybe a question like, okay, so if your boyfriend texts you 10 times in an hour, what word would you assign to that? Is that loving? Is that attentive? Is that possessive? Is that jealous? And how do you know the difference?
Mm-hmm, right.
So make them stop. And if they say, I don't know, that's not an answer. Just say, well, let's really talk that through. Because that's where you flush out these inconsistencies in how they are really thinking about a healthy relationship. But girls in particular, to get attention like that back through digital devices, it's like, oh my gosh. And they wait patiently for that text to come back. And so how do you know? So in your situation, the possessiveness, how did that show up? What were the red flags for you? What were the warning signs? Did your daughter recognize them before you or not? Probably not. I don't know.
No. And, it creates, it becomes kind of an awkward conversation, because we as adults know what an unhealthy relationship looks like, most of us, right? And we as adults understand that that's not healthy. Texting you 10 times going, where are you? Where are you? Why aren't you answering me? Why aren't you answering me? That's not healthy. However, they've never experienced this before, so it creates questions. So you're right. I think I definitely saw it before, and I waited a little bit and talked to her a little bit, not like duh kind of conversations, but just like keeping it real high surface, because I wanted her to be able to come into it on her own. I didn't let it go, trust me, because I knew where it was going. But I tried to push her in that direction as motherly as I could without being overly motherly, without being smotherly.
Yeah. Well, right. Well, and here's the interesting thing. I mean, I'm absolutely fascinated by brain development. I've done tons and tons of independent research and read articles. I'm into reading abstracts and things like that now, which is kind of crazy. But one of the things you mentioned, which I think is really critical, when you talk as a parent to 18, you're speaking two very different languages developmentally. Yeah. So what's happening is, and I'll give you an example. So let's say your daughter has her iPhone and she has a really good friend and they're constantly texting back and forth, back and forth. So her brain has now created a pathway as an expectation that text messaging is normal within 3-second response. Mm-hmm. Okay? Right. Now you have said boyfriend. Boyfriend comes along. Boyfriend texts her. She texts back in that 3-second response. And he doesn't text back for 10 seconds. Uh-oh. Now maybe he doesn't like me.
Right.
So now you kind of subconsciously up the ante to make him want to text you back within that 3-second time frame. So it's a really interesting brain dynamic to program themselves to have certain expectations. Then the justification piece comes in where they say, oh my gosh, look how much he loves me. He texts me back in the 3 seconds just like my best friend does. Well, now it's turned into possession or jealousy or this constant needing to know what you're doing, where you're going, asking a lot of questions. And they think it's, oh, he's so sweet, he cares so much. Yeah, he doesn't really care so much. He's trying to hook you into, being his girlfriend in a way that's very unhealthy.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, do we want to talk about any of the other detours right now? I mean, actually, the whole possessive thing, like what we were just talking about, I think very often leads to one of the other ones, which you spoke on, one of the other detours, which is stress, depression, anxiety, and then it's not fun.
Right. But
who wants to be stressed out?
Well, exactly. So very rarely in an unhealthy dating relationship is there only one isolated detour. It's not just, okay, these kids are drinking together and having fun together and that's all they're doing. No, usually abuse sneaks in a little bit there. And like you said, the depression, anxiety, then the technology piece comes in. Oftentimes the sex piece comes in an unhealthy way. So it's really to send the message to these kids that there's, whatever the message is. Okay, you're not having sex till you're 40. Okay, obviously, yeah. Well, okay, so it's missing the other pieces. You have to talk about how all these other pieces work together. It's like me saying to you, listen, I want you to take driver's ed, but I only want you to learn how to merge onto the freeway. You don't have to learn how to parallel park. You don't have to learn how to turn right at a red light. You don't have to learn any of those things. The only thing I need you to know is how to merge onto the That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So it has to be kind of this all-encompassing. And I think a lot of parents, either miss the pieces or don't know the pieces they're missing because they haven't really had these conversations. And so I'll give you a great example. So my daughter was, I think, 14 and a half, 15, and she was just started driver's training. We're driving down the road one day, and there's a solid line in the middle of the road. And I said to her, so you've taken driver's training. What does this solid line mean? And she goes, well, it means don't pass. And I said, why? She said, well, because it's dangerous. It's unsafe. And I said, okay. I said, what does the dotted line mean on the other side? And she said, well, they can pass, I can't. It's okay for them. It's not okay for me. And I said, all right. I said, let me ask you a question. What happens when you in your mind have set up a solid line, I won't be talked to that way, or I don't want to drink, or whatever it is in your mind, and you date a boy that thinks that's okay. He thinks it's okay to cross the line and you don't. How are you going to have that conversation with him?
Uh-huh.
So pulling in the logic of driving and why it makes sense and why we have the rules we do, why we have signs, why we have lines. I mean, we're not trying to be authority figures here. We're trying to keep you safe.
Right.
If we can teach kids to drive safely and responsibly, why can't we teach them to date safely and responsibly? So it's not saying you can't. It's saying let's ease into this. Let's have some conversations about what will keep you safe. So that's what I think is really important.
And I think a lot of times parents miss this opportunity because it goes back to, again, dating was much different than when we were growing up. And everything is a teaching moment. There's especially when it comes to dealing with heartbreak and the sexuality piece of it. We had a blog post, I believe today actually, on the 10 to 20 site that is related to sending your kids off to college without having the conversation about the extracurricular activities that are bound to happen. And it was such a great headline. It was hangovers and hookups.
Oh, nice.
So that kind of leads into the dating under the influence. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it's funny because, again, going back to tying the detours together, very rarely when I interview girls or coach families or whatever, have a conversation, very, very rarely when they're honest, do girls give into sex the first time without alcohol involved.
Sure.
So, okay, so now it's almost like there's a step, there's process, and okay, the first thing is, okay, honey, here, here, have a beer, here, have a shot of tequila, here, have whatever, loosen everybody up, and then it's much easier, obviously. So, dating under the influence is, it's interesting because, again, there's so many influences in these kids' brains, and they're not thinking, they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So anything having to do with taste, touch, sound, smell, and sight is going to influence this bond, this connection in sometimes a very unhealthy and very dangerous way. So, you smell the alcohol that you've had before, that you had an experience with him before or her before.
Right.
So it continues to cement that, oh my gosh, we're in love. Meanwhile, the other person that's not how they're feeling at all.
Nope.
So, yeah. So when, everybody laughs when I say this, but when you hold his big, strong hand and look into his big blue eyes and smell his Axe cologne, and your favorite song is playing in the background, you're 4 out of 5 right now.
Yeah.
So you have to, you got to watch what your choices
Well,
are.
and girls, I hate saying it, but it's so true. Girls inherently are just looking for love. And they want that, I want to be wanted, I want to be needed, and this is how it is in the movies, and they're so idealistic and romantic, and it doesn't take much to play on that playground.
Yeah,
it really doesn't.
No, and what you're saying is so true. So it's the inputs, it's the constant barrage. When we walk out of our theater here, we go see a movie, we come around the corner, and it's in a mall, the theater, you come around the corner, and the very first thing you see is a Victoria's Secret store.
Oh,
the
geez.
billboard all along the line is eye-level cleavage. That's all it is. And I'm thinking to myself, these poor teenage boys, how do they make it through life without these constant subliminal messages?
Yeah.
And then they look at their phone, and it just goes on and on. So it's really important to give them that technology break, that brain break, and let their brains kind of reset with, like you say, not smothering, but making sure that they're, really kind of checking themselves on the answers to their own questions that are coming up.
You use a couple of interesting analogies in your book, and in kind of in our show notes. But the salesman and the pit crew. Yeah. I'm very intrigued by that. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks. That's one of my favorites, just because, when in my teenage years, I really had no filter, no boundaries, no nothing. It was just like, woo, whatever. And I found that when looking back, there were many, many salesmen in my life. And it isn't necessarily a guy. It might be my math teacher who said, you're so good in math. Instead of going to school for this, why don't you become a CPA? So it's people in your life that mean well, maybe, but it's their agenda. So they have something they're trying to sell you, again, not necessarily maliciously, but they're trying to steer you in a direction that you maybe wouldn't necessarily go. Okay. Pit crew, on the other hand, if you think like Jeff Gordon or any of these, race car drivers, they, in advance, before they ever get on the track, hours and hours and hours of practice, then they assemble, 12 guys, 10 to 12 guys, or women, that are really highly dedicated to keep them from crashing and burning and getting them to the finish line safely.
Okay.
So what my daughter did, as an example, is she chose 10 people. She's 23 years old. I'm still on her pit crew. So in advance, before you ever start dating, you say, this is what I want out of a relationship. These are the things that are important to me. Like, for instance, I don't ever want to date a guy that smokes. Okay, that's just one example.
Okay.
So now if I get in that situation, my daughter gets in that situation, she's already given me permission to say, whoa, red flag, stop. What are you doing? Because if you assemble a pit crew when the race is already in motion, forget it. It's over. It's too late. So the pit crew is designed at a very young age. You can start it. You can start as early as 5 with the right terminology. Get kids used to this accountability, authentic, transparent, way of living where it's not to shame them, it's to help them make better choices, period, in all areas of life. So that's what the pit crew is all about.
I love it. And it's so true because, whether you build them at a young age and, like I've got my best friends still that will look at me and be like, what are you doing? Because they're holding you accountable because they know you. They know you before you were a Mrs. and a mom and everything like that. So they know you.
Yeah. And it's so true. It's so true. I still, I have about 25 people on my pit crew, and I get text messages all the time. I'll post something on Facebook, and she'll say, I'll have a friend that go, wait a minute, what did you mean by this when you said this? I don't think that sounds like you, and here's why. And it's like, hey, who do you think you are? But you know what? It's good. It's like a checks and balances. And I honestly, I tell people, I think I was born needing a front end alignment because I just go off track really easily. It's very, very easy for me to be distracted by something that's not necessarily healthy in my teen years. So it's great to have kind of these people that act as like bumpers and keep me on track and keep me headed in the right direction. Because, I want the future that I wrote out on a piece of paper. I want that. I want that guy. I want that job. I want that college degree, whatever that is. And so sometimes you just kind of end up, oh, gee, this was a lot of fun. I think I'm going to go this way for a while. And it's nice to have that pit crew.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're very similar in that. I call it shiny object syndrome.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit.
It is. So one of the other things that you talk about too is car shopping.
Yeah.
So are we talking about, okay, is this building the perfect beast, if you will?
Well, in a way, and obviously, don't take it too literally that I'm reducing a human being to a vehicle, a car, but the analogy is this, okay, just to get a kid's mindset wrapped around the concept of finding somebody who they might want to spend the rest of their life with, okay? Mm-hmm. Or that they just want to have a nice, healthy relationship with, okay? When you go car shopping, okay, number one, do you get all dressed up, do your hair, do your nails, go for manicure, go to the junkyard and look for a car to drive home? No. Okay, you go to the dealership, right? You go to the dealership and you test drive a car and you don't fall in love with it and then go home and wait till next Saturday where you can get all dressed up and go test drive that same car again. No, you go in your shorts and your t-shirt and you go with this logic in mind and you think, okay, I've already made a list. I know, this is how much I want to spend. These are the options I'm looking for. I'm looking for safety. I'm looking for really good date facts, Carfax report, all those things are really, really important. And you test 5 or 6 cars and you go, oh, I thought I'd really like this one, but I guess it's just not a good fit for me. When you approach it from that perspective where it's logic, it's not emotion. It's car dealers work really, really, and my brother's a car salesman, so I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying, part of what they're doing is they're marketing to you to smell that leather seat and to feel the power of the engine and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's amygdala. Mm-hmm. It's the emotion center of the brain. They're trying to appeal to that. They're not going to stand there boring and go, well, just read the sheet. They're going to get you in to feel the experience. So that's the analogy right there.
Well, and I've kind of used a similar analogy to it's with anything. Anytime you're at the very beginning of any form of relationship, whether it's buying a car, whether it's dating, whether it's interviewing for a job, there's a dance. And both parties are on their absolute best behavior, and you have zipped right into the honeymoon phase before you've even met. Because, using your car analogy, if you walked in and found that was the car you wanted, and the salesman stood there and said, yeah, it's kind of a piece of crap, yeah, you're going to hate it. That's not going to happen because he wants you to get in that car and take it away. Exactly. And it's just that's kind of like that pragmatic piece of logic I try and instill with my kids is that it's always a dance in the beginning. It's, once you've been driving it for 3 months, then you might figure out, oh, this is kind of a piece of crap car.
Well, yeah, and then where's the salesman that talked you into it?
Gone.
If you're broken down on the side of the road, does he give you his number and say, "Hey, I'll get you out of this
Nope.
bind"? No, of course not. So it's absolutely true. There's a lot going on, and to expect a teenager to handle, how many parents would say, "Okay, you want a new car for your 16th birthday, for graduation, for whatever? Awesome, go look and let me know what you think. Let me know which one you want." No, parents go with their kids. Right. They sit there. The dad goes and makes sure that his daughter's not going to get taken advantage of, right? I mean, there's participation, and kids are so grateful for that. Well, try doing that on a date.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
Yeah. Very difficult. However, there's some awesome things you can do with your kids and their dates so that you kind of can observe from a distance and let them have the freedom to get to know each other without you hovering. I call it tailgating, when you're like right on their bumper and you're just like, and you're driving them nuts, and you're causing road rage, right?
Right.
So, but you also don't want to drive blind. You don't want to be this parent that has no clue where your kids are or what they're doing. You don't sit in the passenger seat while they're taking driver's ed with a bag over your head.
Right.
No, you're paying attention. You're watching, don't hit that truck, whatever. That's the reason we're mandated to be in the car. But the other problem is that I see, it's what I call airbag parenting, which is reacting after the fact. And that's really the challenge in this culture. We're a very reactive dating parenting style. So, my daughter's 14. She's not interested in boys. We don't have a problem. We've already talked about it. It's not going to happen. She's not even interested. She's a 4.0 student. She's student council president. And then I get the call 6 months later. She's pregnant. She's got an abusive boyfriend. And she's moved out. She ran away with him. She's moved out of the house. And I'd love to tell you that that's kind of this enormous example, and it's not. It's pretty common, and it's across the board. It doesn't matter income, it doesn't matter religion, it doesn't matter any of those things. Because of social media, we've evened the playing field, and now any person can end up, in what I call the junkyard of broken hearts.
And that is sad, and it is so true. Kind of a different question for you, and one that we have kind of had to deal with is when, let's talk about parents. Let's say your child is dating someone, right? I have this belief, it's almost like if you really, before they officially become an item, right? And the parents and your friends, and then all of a sudden your kids are dating, and I go, that kind of stinks because I can't be friends with you anymore. When your kids date, it's like the whole family dates. I mean, you have siblings that go, "Oh my gosh, I love Johnny. He's so awesome," and blah, blah, blah. And then Johnny and Susie break up, and there's 2 heartbreaks in the family. I mean, do you have any words of advice on that? I mean, do you just say, well, that's just a part of life, easy come?
Yeah, and that's such a good point, because 90% of the kids that date are going to experience heartbreak. Very few kids meet and fall in love in middle school and marry their middle school sweetheart or high school sweetheart, and are happily married 54 years later, whatever. That's great, and there are those stories, but for the most part, so going into it, it's really important, I think, to talk about breaking up before they ever date. And I don't mean when they've already picked somebody, before they even understand what that desire feels like. It's like, this is what breaking up looks like. I don't want to be a killjoy here.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like driving. It's like, if you get in an accident, don't we train, here's what happens if you get a flat tire. Here's what happens if you hit something. Here's why you have insurance. I mean, we talk about all those things. So why not talk about that stuff as well, and say, when you break up, there's going to be heartbreak. It's going to hurt. You are going to be fine. You're going to get over it. We want to minimize the risk. We want to minimize the damage by making sure that you do the right thing. You do it well, and and it might be that you can't be friends with that person anymore. So, consider this. So I think it's important to bring those things up in advance.
Yeah. Well, and because you're right. I mean, again, you have to help them prepare for the inevitable because you're right. I mean, 99.9% of the, relationships never make it. I mean, it's not like you're wishing ill. I'm not wishing ill on you, my dear child. However, I'm also trying to be the voice of reason, but that also means you're the bad guy. Mom!
Right. And I always lead in with that. Like can you imagine my poor children who had to be raised by a dating coach? I mean, how horrible would that be, right? But one of the things I would do is I would lead in with the car thing. I would say, okay, to my son, I would say, all right, so you buy this car, we have insurance, we've done everything we can think of, check consumer reports. What do you think the likelihood is of you having a breakdown at some point? Just hypothetically. A flat tire, run out of gas, hit a mailbox. What do you think do you think it's reasonable to think that 100% of the time, forever and ever, from the point you get your driver's license, you will never have a car issue? Well, that's ridiculous. So let's talk about those issues. Okay, that relates to relationships. Married couples have issues all the time. They hit potholes. They do break down. There are all kinds of things that happen in a marriage relationship. Why do we think it wouldn't happen in a teen dating relationship or any dating relationship? So be prepared for that and know conflict resolution. Understand, how you fight is really important. Are you fair? Are you honest? Are you authentic? Do you listen? Are you a good communicator? So learning these skills in advance so that when those challenges happen, when the breakdown happens, you're prepared. You got a flat tire. Okay, now I know what to do because my dad taught me this is what I do. I pull over to the side of the road. I call, a tow truck, whatever it is. Role play with them. Talk through scenarios that you've heard or read about or their friends have experienced and say, what would you do in that situation?
Absolutely. Lisa, can you believe we're almost out of time?
Oh.
I know. I think we definitely need to follow up on this one. But in a couple of minutes that we have left, you've given us a ton of information. Is there anything that you haven't told us that we need to know?
I think the most important piece that I maybe have said, but I'd love to reiterate, which is to be, the key is a proactive education for these kids to avoid the need for a reactive solution. It's so important to really just dig in, get in there, and all along the way, they are watching you. You are their model. So please just really pay attention to the message that you're sending to them, the messages they're receiving from the rest of the world, and just constantly inspect that from kind of an observant position and get rid of the stuff that's going to cause them damage.
Awesome. Lisa, tell everybody how they can find you. And I always say this, I will be putting all these links in the show notes as well.
Okay, so I do have a blog, which is pretty much 3 times a week. I post really long, meaty articles about a lot of this stuff. And that's at just my name, lisajander.com, Jander. And the other one that's really caught on fire is the online curriculum called Teen Dating License.com. And you can take a really great free survey there. It's called the Teen Dating Readiness Gauge to see if your kid is really ready for dating. And it's the idea is to flush out some of these questions. So teendatinglicense.com. It's an interactive website and really confidential for your family to take the course and educate your teen on these topics.
Awesome. All right. Well, Lisa Jander, thank you so much for joining us this week. And again, Lisa is the author of Dater's Ed, Driver's Ed, Model for Dating. And again, you've been listening to the 10 to 20 Talk Radio podcast. If you have a topic that you're interested in or potentially would like to be a speaker, send us an email at info@10to20parenting.com, or you can send us a tweet at 10TO20, and we'll get back with you as soon as possible. Always remember that you can find these kind of topics topics and more on our website, which is 10to20.com. And please, if you would, subscribe to our podcast either on iTunes or Stitchers. And if you could leave us a review, that's really helpful because it helps other parents find our podcast. And believe me, we have some great topics that parents of teens and tweens really need to be listening to. So as always, I appreciate everyone who is listening. And remember that the age between 10 and 20 is just an age and not a sentence.